Superman 4 was released in 1987. It is directed by Sidney J. Furie. It has a story from Christopher Reeve. And it sees Superman going up against Nuclear Man. So this film has quite the reputation as being, quite frankly, one of the worst movies ever made. Certainly one of the worst superhero movies ever made. And I think when I was going into this, I've seen it before many times. This was actually my favourite as a child, definitely not as an adult. But going into it this time, I was expecting an absolute train wreck. I'm coming off the back of Superman 3, which was already a train wreck, and I was expecting this to be worse. I was like, this ain't going to be good. This ain't going to be a pleasant experience. I think this is one of those films that depends entirely on what mood you're in. The last time I watched this, before this viewing, I did rank it right at the bottom. I just every negative that I could see in it just really bugged me. Whereas this time around, I don't know, maybe watching it so soon after Superman 3, I don't know. I feel like I enjoyed this one more than Superman 3. I feel like despite all its faults, and there are many, it's a bit more focused. It's 35 minutes shorter than Superman 3 for a start. So right there, the pacing is certainly, it's a lot faster. We don't languish in multiple scenes of Richard Pryor pratfalling around for no apparent reason. The story feels a lot more focused. I know what this film is about. I can summarize the plot for you that in a way that tells you what you're going in for. So in that sense, it is more focused. Lex Luthor devises this plan to create a superpowered being using nuclear power, and he does it. And he creates this being, and then there's a big fight between him and Superman. That's it. That's basically the obstacle that Superman has to overcome. It's actually going somewhere, but it is very, very, very low budget. The budget just declined with each of these films. So the producers, the Solkinds, they got to a point in this where I think they were happy to reap whatever benefits came in at the box office, but they didn't really want to put much money into it. I know their company was kind of in dire straits at the time anyway, and they were hoping to get whatever they could off this, I think. But yeah, it shows. You see scenes where you think there should be a special effect, where it looks like they've just not bothered. Like at one point, Superman, he destroys something by simply going, and then we see it kind of destroying. Like, what's going on there? And then when it destroys, when it kind of fades away, you realise, he's just destroyed it with his heat vision, but they didn't put the heat vision in, did they? They must have just, the director thought, this is where he's going to destroy it with his heat vision. He does the manoeuvre. Christopher Reeve looking like a fool because he's doing this thing, but the special effect hasn't been added. So, I can only assume the Solkind said, that's going to cost us money. People can imagine it. They'll get the idea. They've seen enough of these films to know. But the way it stands, it just looks like now that Superman's powers have grown to ridiculous levels of just being able to do things with the power of his mind, which, quite frankly, he has done in these films, under the direction of Richard Lester. Of course, it is great to have Gene Hackman back as Lex Luthor. I felt the loss of him in Superman 3, him not being there was not a plus for the films. He's an enjoyable presence, an enjoyable force of nature as Lex Luthor. So it was good to have him back here. Now, we didn't get his underlings that we got from the first film and kind of the second film as well for a very small portion, but we get a cousin. A nephew, I should say. So we get a nephew played by Jon Cryer. Now, for anyone familiar with the recent DC TV universe, the Arrowverse, Jon Cryer went on to play Lex Luthor. So I'd completely forgot he was in this. So when a lot of people were kind of talking up Jon Cryer as Lex Luthor in Supergirl and that, I was like, all right, I don't really see him as Lex Luthor. And then I watched this again, completely forgetting that Jon Cryer was in this. as Lex Luthor's nephew. So there's a, yeah, in very much the same way that they put Annette O'Toole in Smallville, because she has that legacy of being in the Superman movies. They did the same with John Cryer. I don't particularly rate John Cryer that much as an actor. No offence, I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy and that, but he's never grabbed me with anything he does. I remember finding him hilarious in this as a child. Me and my brothers used to really laugh at the moment when he gets spun around by Nuclear Man, and you look at it now and it just looks dopey, it looks silly. But again, like I say, I think it depends what mood you bring with you to this film. Because I came to it this time expecting the silliness and kind of appreciating it on a childlike level. As I say, when I was a kid, this one was my favourite. Because as a kid, there are certain things you just don't see. You're happy to watch silliness, you're happy for a few laughs. Plot doesn't really matter to that much, just as long as you get the general gist of what was going on. And the fact that Superman was going up against one superpowered being, a bit like him, and it was a mano-a-mano kind of smackdown for the last third of the film. As a kid, that really entertained me. Watching it now, the fight scene isn't that much to talk about. There's stupid moments in this where, like, the Great Wall of China gets destroyed and then Superman rebuilds it with the power of his eyes again. And the fight itself is not that impactful. It's actually quite silly at times. They don't tend to throw punches and kicks so much as just throw each other and spin through space, and it all just looks a little bit silly. There are moments of humour in this that actually work quite well. So there's a whole sequence where Superman is kind of double dating. So Superman is supposed to be doing a thing with Lois Lane, and Clark Kent is supposed to be going on a date with this other woman, this like media mogul executive woman, and it creates this situation where he's got to keep zipping out one end of the building, coming back at the other end, changing his costume, and it's actually quite amusing. It's a nicely constructed little comedic set piece, which works in a way that the Richard Lester stuff didn't work. Like Richard Lester, he just constantly put these moments of slapstick humour into his two movies, and they never worked for me. They just stood out like a sore thumb. Whereas this is more of a situational comedy kind of thing. But aside from being a funny little sequence, it highlights the struggles that Clark has when he's got to be in two places at once as these two personas that, of which he inhabits. The film does suffer from being preachy. This is right at the end of the 80s. You've got a lot of talk about nuclear disarmament, clearly something that was very personal to Christopher Reeve. And so he wanted to make the film about something, but the message is really, really on the nose, really kind of like you can't miss it. So it feels kind of preachy. It does feel like you're kind of being preached to. But again, when you look at this as a film made for kids, it makes sense in a way. I feel like Richard Donner's first film, it wasn't a kids' film so much as it was a family film. It was a film that kids could watch, but it was a film that the whole family would enjoy. Donner just hit that right tone, got the balance perfectly right so that both kids and adults alike could enjoy the film. I feel like Lester kind of steered away from that and just turned things in, he just made things a little bit messy. Whereas here, I feel like this film is aimed squarely at the kids. It's not so much a family film in the sense that Donner's was, it's just directed at kids, which explains why, as a kid, as I say, it was my favourite. But as an adult, I look at it and I kind of cringe. But if I come to this and I get into the child mindset, I mean, my kids were with me when I was watching a lot of this, and they seem to be a bit more intrigued with this one, whereas when the previous films have been on, they've just been like, yeah, whatever, and carried on with their own business. So I think there's something in that. But yeah, it's not a great film. There's leaps in logic, or just a complete lack of logic for the most part. Lex Luthor is able to just get away with things like that and establish bases of operations when he's clearly the most wanted man on the planet given the stuff he's done. It makes zero sense in some quarters, but as I say, it's in and out. It's 90 minutes. It's pretty good pacing. There's some nice sequences in it, and it's a bit more focused than the third one. It's just not a great film on a technical level, and I wouldn't blame director Fury for that. I would blame the Salkinds for not backing him up with the funds that he clearly needed to finish certain shots and things like that. So yeah, it's not great, but it's a lot more watchable than I was remembering it being. I'll give it a 2 out of 5. It's on a par with the third one. Like I say, I think from an enjoyment perspective, I'd give it a 3, but from a technical standpoint, it's probably like verging on a 1. So I'll split the difference, call it a 2. But what about you? How do you feel about Superman 4? Do you feel like it's as bad as people make out, or do you have a bit of nostalgia for this film from when you used to watch it as a kid? Let me know down in the comments how you feel about it. Thank you for watching this video, and until next time, cracking.